Picture this. I'm at the airport coming back from a business trip when I get a desperate call from my wife crying hysterically. They demolished our house. They destroyed everything. When I asked who did this, the answer left me in complete shock. The HOA said our house was outside architectural standards and they had a court order to demolish it. Folks, what this HOA crew didn't know is that they just committed the biggest mistake of their pathetic lives because the house they demolished, it wasn't just my house, it was the home of the federal judge who signed all their eviction sentences for the past 5 years. Stay until the end of this story because you won't believe the revenge I prepared for these criminals. And before you think I'm exaggerating, let me tell you something. When I arrived at the scene and saw my $2 million house completely destroyed, with the rubble still smoking, I found the HOA president, a guy named Robert, celebrating with a beer on the sidewalk like he just won the lottery. He looked at me and said, "Oh, you must be the owner of the illegal house. Don't worry, we did the neighborhood a favor." The smile left his face very quickly when I showed him my federal credentials. But the cherry on top was when I discovered that Robert had not only forged the court order, but had also illegally sold my demolished house's lot to his own son to build a duplex. Folks, grab your popcorn because the revenge that's coming is going to be so epic that Robert probably still wakes up in cold sweats remembering what happened to him. My name is Thomas Mitchell. And for the past 8 years, I've been living what I thought was a peaceful life in an upscale community called Heritage Hills. I chose this place specifically because I wanted privacy and tranquility after decades of dealing with the most complex legal cases in federal court. As a federal judge, my days are filled with life-changing decisions, constitutional law, and high-stakes litigation. Coming home was supposed to be my sanctuary. The house I built was a masterpiece, a custom-designed contemporary home with clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and sustainable materials. Everything was legally permitted, architecturally reviewed, and built to the highest standards. I even hired the same architectural firm that designed 3 other homes in the community. But apparently, that wasn't enough for Robert Chin, our HOA president, who had some very different ideas about what belonged in his neighborhood. The problem started about 6 months ago when Robert began his campaign of harassment. It started small, complaints about my modern mailbox being inconsistent with neighborhood character, fines for my drought-resistant landscaping being inappropriate, and citations for my solar panels creating visual pollution. Every month brought a new violation notice for things that were either perfectly legal or completely fabricated. But Robert's real issue wasn't with my house, it was with me. See, in my professional capacity, I had ruled against several frivolous lawsuits that Robert's property management company had filed against tenants. I had also signed eviction protection orders that prevented his company from illegally removing low-income families from rent-controlled properties. Robert had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because of my rulings, but he never connected the dots between Judge Thomas Mitchell in the courthouse and Tom Mitchell, his quiet neighbor. The harassment escalated dramatically when Robert started showing up at community meetings with architectural experts claiming my house violated deed restrictions that didn't exist. He organized neighborhood petitions, held special assessments to fund legal action against me, and even hired a private investigator to find dirt on my family. When none of that worked, Robert decided to take matters into his own hands. I was in Washington, D.C. for a federal judicial conference when my wife Sarah called, absolutely hysterical. Through her tears, she managed to tell me that a demolition crew had arrived at 6 a.m. with what appeared to be official court documents. They claimed they had a federal court order to immediately demolish our house for emergency safety violations and structural non-compliance. Sarah, who's a pediatric nurse and not familiar with legal procedures, tried to call me but couldn't reach me during the conference sessions. She called our family attorney, but Robert's crew told her that any interference would result in federal charges. By the time she reached me, our entire house, 8 years of memories, priceless family heirlooms, my law library, everything was reduced to a pile of smoking rubble.
When I finally got through to Sarah, she was standing in our neighbor's driveway, watching strangers load our belongings into dumpsters. But here's the part that made my blood boil. Robert was there personally supervising the demolition, taking photos, and actually celebrating. According to Sarah, he told the demolition crew that he was finally cleaning up the neighborhood and that some people need to learn their place. I caught the first flight home, and by the time I arrived, Robert had cordoned off what used to be my property with orange fencing and "Danger, no trespassing" signs. He was still there, now with a small crowd of his supporters, pointing at the destruction like he was showing off a trophy. When Robert saw me approaching, he actually had the audacity to walk over with a smug grin and say, "You must be the homeowner. Sorry about the mess, but your house was a safety hazard and frankly, an eyesore. Don't worry, we're going to make sure something more appropriate gets built here." He handed me what he claimed was the court order authorizing the demolition. I looked at the document and immediately knew it was a forgery. The case number format was wrong, the judge's signature was obviously fake, and most tellingly, it was supposedly signed by Judge Patricia Williams, a judge who had retired 3 years ago. But I decided to play along for a moment. "This is quite a comprehensive order," I said calmly. "Tell me, Mr. Chen, how exactly did you obtain federal court authorization so quickly?" Robert's chest puffed up with pride as he explained how his legal connections and insider knowledge had made it possible to expedite the process. He even bragged about how he'd been planning this for months and had already sold the lot to his son for a family development project. That's when I pulled out my federal credentials and said, "Well, Robert, I think there might be a small problem with your legal strategy. I'm Federal Judge Thomas Mitchell, and this is my courthouse seal you've forged."
The color drained from Robert's face so fast I thought he might faint, but the real panic set in when I made a single phone call. Within 30 minutes, the scene was swarming with FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and forensic investigators. Robert went from celebrating his victory to being read his Miranda rights in handcuffs. But that was just the beginning. The investigation revealed that Robert's demolition scheme was part of a much larger criminal enterprise. He had been forging court documents for years, illegally seizing properties and selling them through his development company. My house was just his most ambitious target because he thought a quiet neighbor wouldn't have the resources to fight back. The federal charges were devastating: forgery of federal documents, conspiracy to commit fraud, destruction of property under federal jurisdiction, civil rights violations, and racketeering. But I wasn't done yet. I also discovered that Robert had used HOA funds to pay for the demolition, essentially stealing from every homeowner in the community to fund his personal vendetta against me. Within 48 hours, federal marshals had seized all of Robert's assets, frozen his company accounts, and placed liens on every property connected to his fraud scheme. His son's development project was shut down, and the lot where my house stood became evidence in a federal criminal case. The community held an emergency meeting where 97% of residents voted to immediately remove Robert and his entire board. They also voted to use the HOA's emergency funds to provide me with temporary housing and begin restitution for my losses. But the most satisfying moment came 3 months later in my own courtroom. Robert, now facing 25 years in federal prison, had to stand before me as I sentenced him for his crimes. I had to recuse myself from the case, of course, but I made sure to attend the sentencing hearing as a victim. Robert received 12 years in federal prison, $3.2 million in restitution, and a lifetime ban from any property management activities. His son lost the illegally purchased lot, his development company went bankrupt, and their family home was sold to pay victims of their fraud scheme. Today, I have a beautiful new house built on the exact same spot, but this time it's surrounded by neighbors who understand that you should never judge people by their quiet demeanor. The new HOA president is a retired librarian who runs meetings with kindness and actually follows the law.
The lesson here is crystal clear. Never assume that your quiet neighbor is powerless, and never use fake legal documents to justify your criminal behavior. Robert thought he was dealing with just another homeowner who would be intimidated by official-looking papers and aggressive tactics. Instead, he targeted the one person in the neighborhood who could spot a forged federal court order from across the street
and had the authority to make him pay for it. If you enjoyed watching this criminal get exactly what he deserved, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served at the perfect temperature. And if you have your own stories of HOA corruption or neighbor revenge, share them in the comments. You might see your story featured in a future video. Hit that notification bell because every week we have new tales of people who thought they could break the law and discovered they messed with completely the wrong person. Until next time, folks.